Hi guys, Sean here from digiDirect. Today we're taking a look at the brand new Sony A7s Mark III, which I'm using to shoot this video right now. Now this is a long-awaited update to Sony's flagship full-frame mirrorless camera that's focused primarily on video. Now this is a camera that comes with a 12 megapixel sensor, which is much lower resolution than most cameras. We'll see why that's beneficial for video, but it does detract from stills a little bit. So I am going to talk about the photography aspect of the A7s a little bit, but this is primarily going to be a review focused on the video capabilities of the camera. All right, without any further ado, let's jump in and take a look at the body of the A7s Mark III. Physically speaking, this is classic design from the Sony A7 series, very similar to what we've seen before. The camera has a quality build. It's got a nice array of buttons, including a joystick, good dials, a nice large grip that feels good, very hefty, and it's fully weather sealed. One excellent feature, considering the video-centric nature of this camera, is a fully articulating screen. It's about time that we saw this on a Sony A7 model. This makes the camera much more versatile for video shooters. Other screen-related improvements are that this is a touchscreen, but like a real full touchscreen where you can scroll through menus, operate your quick menus, and so on. This is much more functionality than Sony's limited touchscreens have had in the past, so that's nice. And speaking of menus, we also have a full menu redesign here with nested menus in a vertical scroll display. This is a significant improvement. Sony menus have always been, at least in my opinion, much more confusing than that from most other major manufacturers. So this change makes the A7s III much more easy to use. I'm sure we'll see this going forward as well. It even includes nice touches like the ability to have different settings when you change between photo and video, so you're not constantly changing your shutter speed and so on. Look, menu design is not super flashy, so you might not have heard as much about it in the marketing specs, but for long-term usability, this is a major improvement. The viewfinder here is an unmatched 9.44 million dots, which is incredibly high res. Obviously, it looks fantastic. We also get dual card slots here, and each of these actually fits both an SD card up to UHS-II and a CF Express Type A, which is a newer, smaller CF card designed for faster speeds. So you can use either of those types of cards in each of these slots, so you've got a good amount of redundancy and versatility here as well. On the other side, we've got a mic, headphone, USB-C, and multiport, plus a full-sized HDMI port, which is a pretty rare find and great for hooking up external recorders and similar. Finally, we have the new-ish FZ100 battery in here. This keeps the camera going for quite a while. I was quite impressed with the battery life. You can shoot for multiple hours and still have battery power left. So as I mentioned, the A7s Mark III has a 12 megapixel sensor inside of it. That's much lower resolution than most other cameras on the market. Why is that? Well, this is because video is actually much lower resolution than stills. So 12 megapixels is plenty for everything the A7s needs to do in terms of video. And the fact that it doesn't have excess resolution means it can operate a lot faster and enable some of the more advanced video features that we'll be discussing later. But for stills, it does mean that you're shooting with a much lower resolution camera, which is why this is primarily not a stills camera. But let's just do a quick discussion of the stills photography here. As you can see, the photos are still very nice. You've got nice, crisp, good colors. I think the imaging coming out of this is still very, very good for stills. So if you are primarily a video shooter, but you do want to capture images for social media or behind-the-scenes shots and so on, you do not need another camera. You can definitely do that still with the A7s Mark III. They look really, really nice. You just are not going to be able to make huge enlargements like you might be able to do with a higher resolution camera. Now it also can shoot at up to 10 frames per second for burst shooting in stills, and it has a very large buffer of about 1,000 shots before the buffer is going to fill. Now there are real advantages to the low resolution of that sensor. First of all, having the low resolution means that the pixels on that sensor are physically larger. They can capture more light, which is what allows for the legendary low light performance that we see on the A7s series. That's very much carried over into the A7s Mark III as well. You can get exceptional shots in very low light situations, ambient lighting at night, very high ISOs. It does a fantastic job there. Now another benefit of the low resolution sensor is an increase of readout speeds. Sony's been able to double that over previous models, and that paired with the faster processor in this camera means that we have significant improvements in rolling shutter on the A7s Mark III. So you can see here, you do still have some rolling shutters, not totally gone, but compared to previous models, this is night and day better. So you can do whip pans, fast movement with a lot more confidence. That is not going to make your images look all jello-y like they have in the past. So the camera has in-body image stabilization, which is rated for 5.5 stops, which is quite respectable. Sony's also introduced a new active steady shot mode here, which is going to do a better job at stabilizing larger movements, like if you're walking, for example. That mode does introduce a slight 1.13 times crop to the footage, although note it is not digital image stabilization, it's still mechanical. I think it's a good job. It does a good job at stabilizing your footage. Sony is not the market leader in this area. I still think that pretty much any Olympus camera is a better IBIS system, and that the new Canon EOS R5 also has a slightly better IBIS system in it than here. But overall, 5.5 stops is nothing to sneer at. This is a very good implementation, and it does a good job. So Sony has taken all of the autofocus technology from their other cameras and brought it over to the A7s Mark III, which means this thing focuses like a dream. This is way better than the A7s Mark II, huge improvement. It has a 759-point phase detect focusing system, which is, super fast, super responsive, exceptional tracking abilities, including touch tracking and so on, and it has a very sticky IAF feature, which is what I'm using to shoot this video right now. You can also adjust the speed at which it changes focus between subjects. You've got a 7-point scale that you can adjust there in the menus, going from 1 for a super slow rack focus, up to 7 for, kind of a quick jump between 2 points, or anything in between there. Now, the only thing that it really doesn't have is that the animal eye autofocus does not work in video. It does for stills, but not for video. That's perhaps just a firmware update, so maybe we'll see that in future. Nonetheless, though, this is a market-leading autofocus performance. Like many of Sony's recent releases, this is absolutely at the top of the pile. Very good in video. I basically never had to use manual focus. It always grabbed on everything I wanted to shoot. So very good implementation of the autofocusing system here. Okay, let's finally get to the video specs on the A7s Mark III. So the camera can shoot internal 10-bit 422 4K video at up to 120 frames per second. That's super impressive. 120 at 4K, that's 5 times slow motion. The video looks amazing. In 4K 120, you do have a very slight 1.1 times crop, but in 4K 60 or below, you've got no crop at all. 4K slow motion looks incredible, and the fact that you can do it all the way up to 120 is incredibly impressive. Now, almost as importantly, there are no overheating issues to speak of on the A7s Mark III. You're not going to get this camera to overheat in any 4K shooting mode. At least I wasn't able to. I wasn't even able to get an overheating warning appear. You can shoot for hours on this camera in 4K, any 4K mode, and not have it overheat. Perhaps it is possible with hours and hours of 4K 120. I'm not even sure, but this represents a level of reliability and versatility that I think is pretty important to a lot of video shooters, especially considering looking at something like the EOS R5, one of its major competitors, that does have these overheating issues. Now, also on top of that, there's no record limit on the A7s Mark III, so you can record beyond the 29-minute limit on many cameras. Again, that's something that is imposed on the EOS R5, not on the A7s III. Now, in 1080p footage, you can record up to 240 frames per second, so even slower slow motion. Now, there are a range of bit rates that you can shoot all this footage at, topping out at 600 megabits per second with the new XAVC-SI encoding, which is all-I H.264. There's also XAVC-HS for H.265 encoding as well, so there's lots of different compression options here. Now, you will need a fast SD card or one of the CF Express Type A cards to record in some of those high-end modes. The camera has S-Log2, S-Log3, and HLG picture profiles for color grading, and it offers a very wide 15 stops of dynamic range. Now finally, the camera can output 16-bit RAW video at up to 4K 60 via that full-size HDMI port if you're going to be shooting with an external recorder like an Atomos unit or similar. And while the camera does not offer the 8K video modes that the Canon EOS R5 touts, I think the robust 4K video shooting options with no threat of overheating and also no record limit is going to be more important to video productions, at least these days. In conclusion, if you are a video shooter, the Sony A7s Mark III is the best option on the market for you. It's a well-built, fully weather-sealed camera with a fully articulating screen, dual card slots, full-size HDMI, improved menus. It's got very low rolling shutter, a capable in-body image stabilization system, exceptional autofocus, and some of the best 4K video features we've seen to date with no threat of overheating, no record limit, and the series' legendary low-light performance. Obviously, the 12-megapixel sensor means it's not as widely usable for photography, but it can still get you by in a pinch. If you are a stills photographer primarily, even if you're 50-50 stills and video, this isn't the camera for you. But if you're a dedicated video professional, the A7s Mark III cannot be beat in terms of functionality, features, versatility, and reliability. If you're interested in purchasing the A7s Mark III, you can order one on our website at www.digidirect.com.au, or you can test one out in store. Come visit us at one of our locations. We've got stores in the Sydney CBD, Bondi Junction, Miranda, the Brisbane and Melbourne CBD, and Cannington, Western Australia, which is just outside the Perth CBD. Thanks, guys. Take care.